After 5 years' preparation, Spectacular Bodies opened at the Hayward Gallery in London on the 19th of October 2000. This exhibition consisted of over 300 works drawn from 80 medical and art museums in 15 countries. Last year, Philippe Comas and Jean Clair organised a comparable exhibition at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts entitled An Anatomy Lesson, Figures of the Body at the École des Beaux-Arts. By no means were these the first exhibitions focusing upon the conversion of art, science and medicine in the body. Throughout this time, a succession of books were published on the body in its relationship to art, science and medicine. These exhibitions and books signified what Michel Foucault called a rupture and transformation in the discursive field. Ignited by the research of Foucault, demonstrating how power is insidiously inscribed upon the body, this interdisciplinary praxis of art, science and medicine became paradigmatic for the study of art and its histories from Oxford University to COFA. In their focus upon the body, art historians across America, Australia, Britain, Canada and Europe demonstrated that art, science and medicine became so inextricably intertwined that it was impossible to separate the history of art from the histories of these other disciplines. With these disciplines reinforcing one another, from the time that Andreas Vesalius began public dissections, the body was turned into a spectacle. It became, as this lecture will try to reveal, the prime object of the gaze. Yet as public dissections made the body more analysable and pliable, this lecture will also endeavour to reveal how the spectacularisation of the body in the art school, the clinic and the laboratory was seminal to a new political anatomy in which the body became the target of power, as encapsulated by the single term Foucault chose to embody its subjection: biopolitics. While human dissections were carried out by the Greek physicians in the 3rd century BC, Hippocrates' knowledge of the human body, like that of the Greco-Roman physician Galen, was gleaned mostly from the dissection of animals, particularly primates. While dissection of the human body was prohibited in ancient Greece and Rome, it was deemed heretical by the Roman Catholic Church to examine the bones of corpses, let alone to operate upon them. Merely touching the body of the dead was damned as consorting with the devil. However, when the human body became the measure of all things during Renaissance humanism, many physicians and artists maintained that the only way to find out about the mechanisms of the body was to dissect it. The only way they could do so was by dissecting corpses, as epitomised by the work of Leonardo da Vinci. At the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, Leonardo had studied anatomy. To understand the body through dissection, he reputedly raided graveyards. Under cover of the shadowy twilight, at daybreak or at the approach of night, Leonardo slipped furtively into graveyards, digging up the graves of the dead and plunging his scalpel into corpses taken from the coffins." Unquote. Once established as a master, however, Leonardo was permitted to dissect human corpses at the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, as well as at hospitals in Milan and Rome. Collaborating on an archive of the body with Professor of Anatomy Marcantonio della Torre, they produced the first anatomical texts to be accompanied by illustrations. In over 750 X-ray drawings, Leonardo set out to show the bones, and I quote, separated and somewhat out of position, so that it may be possible to distinguish better the shape of each bone by itself. This was illustrated by his drawing of the human skeleton, as well as the tendons and muscles of the foot, ankle and lower leg. To pay homage to the organic complexity of the body in all its detail, Leonardo drew the musculature of a woman's abdomen and the human fetus in utero, the first known medical drawing to do so. To understand the workings of the brain, Leonardo performed the first known horizontal and vertical dissections of the cranium. Despite their continuing medical significance, Leonardo was hauled in front of the Vatican in 1514, accused of necromancy and witchcraft, and ordered to stop dissections, his drawings not being published until 160 years after his death. Only during the Protestant Reformation was the Brussels-born anatomist Andreas Vesalius able to conduct dissection publicly. From this time onwards, as Martin Kemp writes in Spectacular Bodies, the opening up of a body became a ritual act. When Vesalius began studying the medical theories of the Greco-Roman physician Galen, he became so absorbed in anatomy that he exhumed bones and skulls at the French Cemetery of the Innocents. Outraged, the Roman Catholic Church insisted that Vesalius be expelled from the Sorbonne. On returning to Protestant Leuven, he was able to continue to study corpses. Vesalius was permitted to dissect the bodies of executed criminals that had been made available by a Paduan judge supportive of Vesalius's research. Although most of these criminals had been hanged, Vesalius used the same method to access the corpse. When I undertake the dissection of a human cadaver, Vesalius explained, I pass a stout rope tied like a noose beneath the lower jaw and through the zygomatus up to the top of the head. The lower end of the noose I run through a pulley fixed to a beam in the room so that I may raise or lower the cadaver as it hangs there or turn it around in any direction to suit my purpose. Performing within a theatre, Vesalius is depicted dissecting the abdomen of a woman, supposedly to reveal God as the supreme maker. His right hand is significantly on the dissected body, and his left hand is raised in explication to a crush of Paduan spectators. Promoting dissection as a primary teaching tool to his students, clustered around the operating table, hands-on direct observation was, Vesalius maintained, the only reliable source. It is illustrated by the detailed anatomical drawings Vesalius commissioned from artists 1 year later to create an updated version of Galen's anatomical handbook. Following Vesalius, the most prominent dissections were staged as public or semi-public performances in specially constructed theatres. This term is still used for the hospital room in which operations are conducted. In the Protestant city of Leyden, the Crown Basilica layout of the dissecting theatre used by Vesalius was replaced by spacious amphitheatres. modelled upon the architecture for drama theatres, most notably designed by Indigo Jones. These tightly packed tiers of circular or elliptical balconies, just wide enough to accommodate a file of standing or mobile spectators, provided clear lines of sight of the corpse below. As signified by the range of dress in the illustration of the Leyden Anatomy Theatre, these spectators were as likely to consist of curious non-specialists as aspiring members of the medical profession. Such stage events were designed to exude an aura of wonder as well as morbid fascination, over which the professor acted as the master of performance, making pronouncements for the eager press of spectators. So prestigious did these performances become that the elected prelectors or reader demonstrators, with their favoured colleagues, would subscribe to the cost of a group portrait to be hung in the Surgeons' Guild. Hence, these portraits are not necessarily designed to appear as realistic representations of an actual dissection, but as allegorical proclamation of the surgeons as the renowned masters of the secrets of the body. The specific subject in all of these portraits is the mastery of the surgeon's hand, long revered as the instrument of instruments. This is illuminated by Rembrandt's portrait of Dr. Nicholas Tulp, orchestrating the gaze with his tweezers in his right hand. Rembrandt's Dr. Tulp encourages the spectator to trace the superior and inferior flexor tendons that pass from the forearm to hand, interpenetrating each other on the inside of the fingers. While the hands of the surgeon conducting the brain operation are also prominent, so is a substance conspicuous by its absence through the sanitised staging of such paintings. That substance was blood. To be dissected was a punishment pronounced to selected criminals while alive. Dissecting those condemned to die at the hands of an executioner was sanctioned by both secular and religious laws. This is caricatured by William Hogarth's, in which the criminal, Tom Nero, suffers the ultimate indignity of being dissected fully awake in front of the public gaze. Yet not only must he endure the punitive cutting at the hands of a sadistic surgeon, notice the glee on the surgeon's face, but as his intestines unravel across the operating theatre, he must also endure having his guts gobbled up by a voracious dog. While the dehumanisation of the condemned, together with the messiness of these operations, is denied and disavowed in these images, it is emphasised by contemporary British artist John Isaacs, who was included in the Spectacular Bodies exhibition. In The Matrix of Amnesia, the human body is treated by Isaacs as if it has become an anonymous hunk of meat. Without memory or feelings, it can be tossed around in the public dissection theatre, just like a piece of garbage in the street. In A Necessary Change of Heart, the skinned corpse, with blood oozing from the bones and intestines, reveals the bloodiness of dissection and the need for what Leonardo called a strong stomach. Under the anatomy instruction of Suppert at the École in the late 18th century, skeletons were placed in the poses of antique sculptures. As health became the new salvation of the modern nation-state, particularly in France, the most athletically developed and anatomically challenging sculpture, The pugilistic gladiator became the paradigmatic body for emulation, as signified by the adulation captured in this painting by Joseph Wright of Derby. While drawing and measuring from skeletons imitating sculpture was a common component of anatomical study, so was drawing from casts of flayed figures with the skin peeled off to reveal the muscles and tendons, as illustrated by Nicolas Bétrizet. Functioning as surrogates for the dissected body, these écorchés entered art academies throughout Britain and Europe, where they were paraded as exemplars of heroic perfection. Once the distinction between their function as pedagogical models and artworks became blurred, écorchés became an art genre in their own right, as illustrated by the anatomical study printed in 3 to 4 colours by French engraver Jacques-Fabien Gauthier d'Agoty, in which the flesh seems peeled back on alluring living bodies, including the uterus of an expectant mother. Like plaster casts, écorchés became collector's items, as illustrated by Zoffany's painting of Townley Gallery, filled with both objects for the edification of Charles Townley and his young friends. Through versions in plaster and bronze, the 18th century flowering of academic écorchés were widely diffused from the St. Petersburg Academy to the Royal Academy in London. The Royal Academy's first anatomy professor, Dr. Hunter, commissioned an extensive series of écorchés, starting with the écorché known as Smugglerius. This flayed corpse of a muscular smuggler was sculptured in the pose of the Roman statue of the dying Gaul by Agostino Carlini and recast for the Academy by William Pink. He also commissioned Thomas Banks to turn the body of a murderer into the crucified Christ. The pedagogical value of these casts and écorchés was only surmounted by the viewing and performance of dissection, particularly once cadavers became legally available. Until 1788, the Bloody Code, as it was known, reigned in Britain. Pickpocketing, stealing horses or sheep, or anything worth more than 5 shillings was punishable by the death penalty. After the American War of Independence, transportation became an alternative, particularly to Australia. By 1823, when the Judgment of Death Act made the death penalty discretionary, this meant that the number of cadavers available for dissection had dried up. Students received only 2 to 3 corpses each year. To capitalise upon the needs of the growing art schools and medical faculties in the industrialised nation states, body snatching became a profession. With a thriving black market in cadavers and body parts, 17 serial murders occurred in Edinburgh alone by the notorious Irish body snatchers William Burke and William Hare. Unable to sell them off to Edinburgh University, they were then offloaded to this shady-looking character, who was in fact an anatomy professor, Dr. Robert Knox, the model for Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll. With the passing of the Anatomy Act in 1832, bodies could be left for the advancement of science through dissection, as illustrated by the extraordinary auto-icon of Jeremy Bentham. Cadavers could also be legally supplied for medical research, with licences issued for the practice of dissection. From the Anatomy Act, the appearance of cadavers and students undertaking dissection then became commonplace at the Royal Academy. Under Medical Professor of Anatomy, John Marshall, dissections were conducted by such artists as Ford Madox Brown, Edward Burne-Jones and Frederick Leighton. Following the insurgence of positivist empiricism in France, so important did dissection become to anatomy training at the École des Beaux-Arts that a special competition in anatomy dissection was held from 1855 with a prix supérieur in anatomy, a superior prize in anatomy. These dissections were prioritised to such an extent that local residents complained of cadavers being dragged unceremonially across their houses before the anatomy lesson, and they also complained of the detritus of human remains being chucked over their garden walls after it. So popular were dissections and autopsies that after the Paris morgue was redesigned by Haussmann, it opened to the public in 1864 with nameless cadavers dredged up from the Seine displayed in its front window. Yet from the time that the Paris morgue was opened, cadavers became a compulsive spectacle. Located in queasy proximity to the salon, a morgueur became the new spectator, who in the pursuit of vigorous naturalism straddled gazing at cadavers in the morgue to gazing at death-like dissected figures filling the salon, from Jean-Baptiste Clesinger's Woman Bitten by a Snake to Edouard Manet's The Angels at Christ's Tomb, in which the body of Jesus is propped up just like a cadaver on display at the morgue. Until the last part of the 19th century, the model of the body for art and medical students was then determined by this necrophilic preoccupation with the cadaver. Only with the appointment in 1873 of physician and Sorbonne head of anatomy, Matthias Duval, and of Paul Richet in 1903, when the new sciences became seminal to the curriculum, was a reorientation engineered from the dead to the live body. With the new sciences, more than ever the anatomy lesson in the art school then paralleled the anatomy lesson in the operating theatre, as well as in the new neurological clinic, as exposed by the analogies that may be drawn between André Bruyère's Charcot's clinical lesson at Salpêtrière and François Sallet's the anatomy class at the École des Beaux-Arts. Every Tuesday, Jean-Martin Charcot would hold his lectures in the amphitheatre of Salpêtrière's Women's Hospice, where he had founded his clinic for neuropathology. Amongst the huge numbers who flocked to his Tuesday's lectures, Bruyère shows Richet seated at the table, sketching the lecture, and Duval standing forth from the right in the upper register. Not only had Duval and Richet trained with Charcot, but Richet had also collaborated with him on numerous projects across art, science and medicine. At these Tuesdays, Duval, Richet and other physicians and neurologists would watch Charcot closely scrutinise the live human body in movement rather than the still cadaver, as illustrated by Charcot's favourite hysterical patient, Blanche Whitman, falling into the third phase of the hysterical fit, where her body forms or is starting to form an arc de cercle. Following Charcot, both Duval and Richet deployed the live moving body in the anatomy lesson at the École as captured by François Sallet. With Duval's appointment, body photography was introduced, particularly the new scientific photography developed by Salpêtrière neurologist Guillaume Duchesne de Boulogne to capture muscular movement during electric shocks. Enrolment at the École des Beaux-Arts entitles students to attend any lectures at the medical as well as the science faculties. Nevertheless, in Lemaistre's print of Duval's anatomy lesson, a cast of the gladiator remains alongside Houdon's exemplary écorché, including Houdon's exemplary écorché, in which the muscles had been coloured red, the veins picked out in blue, and the tendons in white. Before Duval's 38 anatomy lessons, he would prepare the cadavers. He would also prepare the anatomy room for live models, as illustrated in the painting by Salé. Spotlighted at the centre of the École des Beaux-Arts Anatomy Theatre, Salé portrays Duval with his students fanned out around him. Below is his demonstrator. Yet above him is the écorché by Jacques Eugène Caudron, the modern flayed figure drawn by many students and celebrated by Duval for its movement. On the operating table before Duval appears his dissecting instruments and anatomical skeletal fragments from the scapula down to the hidden bones of the hand. Significantly, Duval is not depicted showing how this was performed by the écorché or by the skeleton, but by the live model. While Duval's physical contact with the naked part of the model's body, his hand parallel with the trousers undone at the waist, draws attention to the movement of the live body, it also directs the spectator's gaze to the interplay between the model, the live model, and the écorché. As the model and écorché are the most strongly spotlighted in the painting, the direction of the fall of light is used to draw the spectator's gaze inexorably towards the differences between the warm, sensual, brutal strength of the man and physical prowess of the labourer's body, and the cold, taut musculature of the white plaster écorché. They crystallise what can be taught from both the live body as well as the cadaver. Even the appointment in 1903 of Salpêtrière hospital neurologist Paul Richet, who ardently endorsed the science of the nude and who vigorously opposed the study of the dead body, was accompanied by an anatomy demonstrator and always included dissection. In his book entitled The Artistic Physiology of Man in Movement, Richet stressed the need to study a range of movement generated by modern sport and bodybuilding. From his appointment as anatomy professor to the École, Richet collected photographs of bodybuilders, as exemplified by the gorgeous Edmond Debonnet, and Richet also commissioned chronophotographs of athletes from Albert Londres. Over 3,000 frames of these models, stretching, kneeling, bending, arching and throwing, were assembled into an archive. Throughout his 24 anatomy lectures at the École, Richet directed students to abandon the undeveloped body as anachronistic. He urged students to study the muscles of the athletic living, not dead body, and not those visible at a particular moment. Discarding the immobility of studio poses, Richet projected Albert Londres and Etienne Jules Mauret's chronophotography of athleticized anatomy in multiple moving form. Rejecting the hermeticism of the studio, Richer urged students to go out and find this new anatomy in, and I quote, the bodybuilders renewing the labours of Hercules, in the perfectly balanced bodies of acrobats at the circus, in the young athletic bodies at sporting reunions and at football matches. This new artistic anatomy was also created and exhibited by Paul Richer himself. Yet, as the Écorché in Brancusi's studio illustrates, the flayed body remained seminal to Richer's anatomy course, as did dissection. In fact, so highly esteemed was the new science of surgical dissection that it became a subject for scientific realistic painting. In modern transpositions of Rembrandt's anatomy lesson, Dr. Payen is portrayed by Henri Gervais, poised before the operation in which he discovered the compression of blood vessels. I just have to point out that although this is meant to be immensely serious, with all the surgical instruments arrayed here, so we get the gist of this scientific realism, Gervais certainly doesn't spare us any erotic titillation, as you will be able to determine by the juxtaposition of this physician supposedly taking the pulse of this gorgeous patient, juxtaposition of his hand by a perfectly formed strawberry nipple. The renowned Philadelphia surgeon, Dr. Samuel D. Gross, is depicted by American realist Thomas Eakins as he operates upon the osteomyelitis of the femur without amputation, while David Hayes Andrews is shown performing his new operation or directing his new operation for mastectomy at the Agnew Clinic. Thus, art, medicine and science worked hand in hand in the process of formulation and transformation of ideas about the body through the most direct and potent medium of communication, through the spectacle, particularly of dissection, and through the visual image. Through dissection, the skeleton, the écorché, and the anatomy lesson, the same model of the body was figured, disciplined, and normalised. To control rapidly growing populations in the modern democratic nation state, Michel Foucault argues that coercion and dissuasion were exercised upon the body through the disciplinary architecture and mechanisms operative in every institution. Through the partitioning of space and the disciplinary routines in schools, armies, factories, hospitals and prisons, these institutions were able to function as coercive machines. Yet what Foucault does not explore is the impact of the anatomy lesson and the visual image in art, science and medicine upon the regulation and normalisation of our bodies. As public dissections made the body more analysable and pliable, this spectacularisation of the body in the art school, the clinic and the laboratory was seminal to a new political anatomy in which the body became the target of power as encapsulated by Foucault's term biopolitics. Through this spectacularisation, the body was then insidiously manoeuvred, disciplined, regulated and normalised, as captured by its depiction during dissection and during the anatomy lesson. Ultimately, what this dissection of spectacular bodies conducted over the past 15 years in art and its histories, ultimately what this may expose is not just the ways in which the internal and external body was rendered more visible to the public gaze, but the ways in which it was also rendered far more docile.